Maria Jimenez Rodriguez was last seen on June 21, 2018, in the 6900 block of Texarkana Street in Houston, Texas. The day started like any other. She dropped her 4-year-old daughter off at a babysitter's house next door and went back home to grab her purse and gym bag before leaving again. Her brother watched her as she left the house to go to work. Maria worked as a paralegal at Mill Edge Law Firm and was typically at work by 8 a.m. or earlier, but that morning she did not show up. At 8:57 a.m., a co-worker received a message from Maria's phone saying, "Good morning, I am running late stuck in traffic." At 10:12 a.m., a second message came through saying, "Hey, had to turn back around the nanny asked me to take because she's not acting right." After that, Maria's co-worker repeatedly tried to reach her, calling and texting, but received no response until 6:18 p.m., when another message came in. The third and final text read, "Sorry, I'm okay and is fine, but this red truck with 2 white boys or Hispanics seem like they've been following me. Call you from a safe place." This message raised immediate concerns. It was much longer than the texts Maria typically sent, and while she usually mixed Spanish and English in her messages, this one was written entirely in English. Furthermore, the message referred to her daughter, using a nickname Maria never used. Maria's sister stated that if Maria had been in danger, she would have called 911 or used her vehicle's OnStar system instead of sending a text message. The babysitter, whom Maria had reportedly turned back to pick up her daughter, had not actually contacted her after Maria left for work, further fueling doubts about the authenticity of the final message. The next day, Maria's silver truck was found abandoned in the 100 block of Port Street, about half a mile from her home and not along her usual route to work. The truck was locked and in good condition, with her gym bag inside, but her purse, keys, and phone were missing. In August 2019, Eric Fardell Arsenault was charged with Maria's murder. Arsenault had claimed to be Maria's boyfriend, but her loved one said he was actually her personal trainer, and he had become obsessed with her after she rejected him. She wasn't interested in a relationship with him, but he began stalking her, and investigators believe this obsession led to her murder. Authorities believe he killed Maria and dismembered her body with a chainsaw, although her remains have never been found. Arsenault remains at large. He was 47 years old in 2019, described as black, 5 feet 8 inches tall, weighing 160 pounds, with short black hair and brown eyes. Arsenault initially told police that he hadn't seen Maria on the day she disappeared, but phone records indicated their phones had been at the same location at the same time. Investigators also tracked the couple's phones to a Home Depot store in northwest Houston, where surveillance footage showed a man matching Arsenault's description purchasing a chainsaw and trash bags. A receipt for these items, signed with Arsenault's name, was found. Maria was not seen on the store's surveillance video. A search of Arsenault's home revealed blood on the walls and ceiling, but authorities were unable to test the blood for DNA. Additionally, Arsenault was identified as the person seen on video abandoning Maria's truck on Port Street. Maria Jimenez Rodriguez was described as intelligent, outgoing, responsible, and a devoted mother. It was completely out of character for her to miss work or leave without warning. Given the circumstances of her disappearance, foul play is strongly suspected, and her case remains unsolved. Kendrick Jackson was last seen on the morning of April 7, 2006, in his bedroom at the Canfield Falls apartment complex in Houston, Texas. A few months prior to his disappearance, Kendrick had moved in with his father, Roderick Terrell Fountain, his stepmother, and 2 half-siblings. Previously, Kendrick had been raised by his maternal grandmother and his mother, Kiana Jackson. Fountain stated that he last saw Kendrick at approximately 9:30 a.m. when he was sitting in his bed. Fountain left the apartment briefly to do laundry, and upon returning, he discovered that Kendrick was missing, with the front door left open. Initially, it was believed that Kendrick had been abducted by a non-family member, as witnesses reported seeing him with an unidentified black man at a nearby Metro bus stop. The man was described as being between 30 and 40 years old, standing 5 feet 7 inches to 5 feet 9 inches tall, and wearing jeans and a white shirt. However, the investigation soon shifted focus. Fountain was arrested just days after Kendrick's disappearance and charged with filing a false police report. He had made inconsistent statements regarding the events leading up to Kendrick's disappearance and could not account for his whereabouts between 2:30 and 6 a.m. on the morning of April 7th. Shortly after his arrest, Fountain was also charged with causing injury to a child, stemming from visible bruises on Kendrick's body prior to his disappearance. In April 2006, Fountain was additionally charged with being a felon in possession of a firearm when investigators found a shotgun in his residence during a search related to Kendrick's case. Fountain had multiple felony convictions dating back to 1992, including offenses related to drugs, theft, and weapons, as well as violent crimes. Notably, he had been accused of murdering a teenage boy in 2000, although he was released due to insufficient evidence. Due to his criminal history, Fountain was not legally allowed to own a firearm, and he pled guilty to the firearms charge in September 2006. Despite these charges, investigators quickly became convinced that Kendrick was dead and that Fountain was responsible for his son's death. Fountain had been ordered to have no contact with his other 2 children from his marriage, and he had 6 additional children from different women. Initially, Kendrick's mother, Kiana, stated that she believed her son had been abducted by a stranger and that Fountain had not harmed him. However, her stance changed, and she eventually came to suspect that Fountain had killed Kendrick. Kiana revealed that she had witnessed Fountain abusing Kendrick on numerous occasions, but allowed them to maintain a relationship in the hope that Kendrick would have a bond with his father. In June 2009, more than 3 years after Kendrick's disappearance, Fountain was charged with felony murder in connection with his son's presumed death. Authorities believe that Kendrick died after being struck by his father, with Fountain's alleged abuse leading to the fatal incident. Fountain's defense during his trial in the fall of 2011 argued that without Kendrick's body, there was no definitive proof that the child was dead. Prosecutors contended that Fountain unintentionally killed Kendrick while beating him. 2 of Fountain's former cellmates testified against him, claiming he confessed to killing Kendrick after the child wet himself. They alleged that Fountain had wrapped Kendrick's body in garbage bags and disposed of it off a boat ramp in Louisiana. Fountain was convicted of Kendrick's murder in October 2011 and sentenced to life in prison. However, he has continued to maintain his innocence, despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence. Kendrick's body has never been found, and foul play is suspected in his disappearance due to the troubling circumstances surrounding his case. Marion Hurley was last seen on September 19, 1999, when her husband, William Stanley Will Hurley, told authorities that she had driven to the Three Oaks Golf Course in Granbury, Texas, a property the couple owned on Fall Creek Highway. According to Will, Marion left their 2 young daughters in his care and announced that she was heading to California. He stated that she entered a white passenger car with an unidentified woman and drove away, never to be seen again. Shockingly, Will never reported Marion as a missing person to the authorities. It wasn't until later in the week that a friend of the family contacted law enforcement after Marion failed to reach out to anyone. Investigators discovered that on the day before Marion's alleged departure, September 18th, the Hulleys had taken their children camping at De Cordova Dam Park. The couple's eldest daughter told investigators that her mother had spent the entire day with them at the park on September 18th, but that Marion disappeared the next morning. When the daughter questioned Will about her mother's whereabouts, he simply said that Marion would no longer be living with them. The conflicting statements surrounding Marion's movements on September 19th have left authorities uncertain about the true nature of her disappearance. While Will's version of events suggested that Marion left willingly, her family and friends expressed disbelief. They stated that Marion's marriage to Will had been troubled and that she had been unhappy with her life. They found it extremely out of character for Marion to leave her children behind without any communication. At the time of her disappearance, Marion had no known travel plans, and investigators found no evidence suggesting she left with another man. Additionally, Marion was not believed to be suicidal, and there has been no activity on her credit or ATM card since September 1999. Searches were conducted near the number 8 tee box on the golf course, as it was theorized that Marion's body may have been buried there. However, The only remains recovered were those of a large dog, whose burial in that location remains unexplained. Authorities also pursued a lead suggesting Marion may have moved to a drug house in Texas in 1999, but no evidence supported this theory. Another possible explanation was that Marion had checked herself into an alcohol rehabilitation center, as she was known to be an occasional heavy beer drinker. However, no evidence was found to suggest she left voluntarily. Will and Marion had been married in California before relocating to Texas around 1991, where Will worked at the Comanche Peak nuclear plant. After Marion's disappearance, Will and their daughters moved to Arkansas. Despite investigator suspicions, Will has never been charged in connection with Marion's case, and no arrests have been made. When approached by a reporter in 2000, Will claimed that Marion had unspecified problems, but refused to discuss the case further. Searches in the DeCordova Dam Park area and other potential locations have turned up no answers. Marion Hurley's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. Ulenhodkinson vanished on the evening of September 11, 1988, after leaving his mother's home in Pinehurst, Texas. Located in the 3800 block, his residence was where he shared his last known plans. A seemingly routine outing to grab a meal, talk to his boss, and pick up a part for a grinder. Ulen never returned, and no one has seen or heard from him since. Investigators later concluded he likely had no intention of being gone long. A welder by trade, he had left his tools out in the open, something entirely uncharacteristic of him unless he planned to come back shortly. When Ulen didn't return home, his father reported him missing the following day, setting off an investigation that would uncover troubling clues but no definitive answers. 2 days after his disappearance, on September 13, 1988, Ulen's black and charcoal 1988 Dodge Dakota pickup truck was discovered abandoned. Strangely, it wasn't officially reported to police until September 22, delaying the investigation further. The truck was found in an isolated location on a dirt road in rural Orange County, Texas, about a mile north of Interstate 10. The area, heavily wooded and near an old, abandoned oil well, seemed an unlikely place for him to have traveled willingly. The scene offered no direct signs of Ulen himself. His vehicle was locked, and the keys were missing, along with several personal items: a camera, a large stereo player, and an AR-15 military-style rifle. Oddly, the tire jack had been removed from the cab and placed in the truck bed, though the tires were new and unlikely to have required attention. Another eerie detail was the position of the windshield wipers, left standing upright, suggesting that it may have been raining when the truck was abandoned. In the days leading up to his disappearance, a conversation Ulen had with the convenience store clerk raised further questions. He had confided to the clerk that he knew something serious, but wouldn't disclose it unless required to testify in court. What this serious information entailed remains unknown, but some have speculated it might have played a role in his vanishing. Whether it was a mere coincidence or a dangerous secret tied to his fate, the details remain lost to time. Authorities questioned 5 individuals regarding Ulen's disappearance, narrowing their focus to one suspect who reportedly had both motive and opportunity. One officer went so far as to publicly state his belief that Ulen had been murdered. However, the same officer clarified that he did not think drugs were involved in the crime, an assertion that has left the true motive for the presumed foul play a mystery. Over 3 decades later, Ulenhodkinson's case remains unsolved. Cecilia Gallegos was last seen at her home in the 5600 block of Southwick Road on the west side of San Antonio, Texas. On the morning of July 8th, her husband, Reyes Gallegos, called 911 to report that they had argued about infidelity, during which Cecilia allegedly attacked him with a knife. When police arrived, Reyes had visible injuries, including a scratch on his chest, marks on his face, and a superficial cut on his finger. However, Cecilia was nowhere to be found. Reyes claimed she had left with an unidentified man waiting outside in a car, stating that she intended to leave the family. Cecilia has not been seen or heard from since. She left behind all her belongings, including her phone, the couple's vehicles, and unused credit cards. Nearly 2 months after her disappearance, Reyes was arrested and charged with filing a false report. Investigators uncovered surveillance footage from the family's home on July 8th that contradicted his 911 account. The footage showed no evidence of a fight between Reyes and Cecilia, nor did it depict Cecilia at all on July 8th. Instead, the cameras recorded Cecilia arriving home shortly after 7:30 p.m. on July 7th. She went into the couple's bedroom about 15 minutes later and was never seen on camera again. Early the next morning, at 2:08 a.m., the surveillance system was shut off and remained off until 3:44 a.m. Once Reyes reactivated it, the footage showed him leaving the house 4 times in his white Chevrolet Tahoe. 3 of these trips were brief, lasting between 2 and 11 minutes, but the 4th, starting at 6:27 a.m., lasted over 2 hours. Reyes returned home at 8:48 a.m., after which the cameras recorded him unloading 2 shovels, a chainsaw, trash bags, and cleaning supplies. His shirt appeared wet, potentially from sweat. He then took a shower and called the police with his story about Cecilia cutting him. The timeline leading up to Cecilia's disappearance further raised suspicion. At the time, Cecilia was a certified nursing assistant at St. Francis Nursing Home and was scheduled to work until 11 p.m. on July 7th. However, Reyes unexpectedly arrived at 6:40 p.m., over 4 hours early, to pick her up. Surveillance footage from the nursing home showed the two talking, with Cecilia appearing visibly uncomfortable as she backed away from Reyes, who stood very close to her. Cecilia told the head nurse she needed to go home to check on her children and left at 7:20 p.m. Upon returning home, the couple's children, aged 6 to 14, heard their parents arguing. One child recalled hearing screams and covered her ears to block out the sound. Reyes made the children stay in their bedroom during this time. The week following Cecilia's disappearance, Child Protective Services removed the children from Reyes's care and placed them with Cecilia's sister. Meanwhile, Reyes faced additional legal trouble. The day after his false report charge, he was arrested for an unrelated assault that occurred weeks earlier, on June 22nd, where he allegedly punched a male friend in the face. Reyes ultimately pleaded guilty to filing a false report and received a 6-month jail sentence, with credit for time served. The assault charge was dismissed in January 2020 due to a lack of witness testimony. In August 2021, Reyes was arrested again, this time on suspicion of Cecilia's murder. Police stated that their case against him was built on numerous small pieces of evidence pieced together over time, but many details remain undisclosed. Cecilia's family has spoken out about the troubled relationship she had with Reyes, describing him as controlling and abusive. Cecilia had confided in her brother shortly before her disappearance, expressing fear for her safety and saying she was saving money to move out and install an alarm system in a new residence. She also told a friend that if anything happened to her, Reyes should be questioned. The family's neighbors described them as reclusive, noting they kept their gate locked to deter visitors. Although Cecilia's body has never been found, foul play is strongly suspected due to the circumstances surrounding her disappearance and Reyes's behavior. Her case remains open. Donia Howard was last seen in San Antonio, Texas, on December 14, 1985. That morning, her 12-year-old son awoke to find his mother gone, leaving behind her keys, car, and purse. Donia had seemingly vanished without a trace and was never heard from again. At the time of her disappearance, Donia was recently divorced and lived alone with her 2 children. Although she had a history of drug use and several alcohol-related arrests, her loved ones stated that while it wouldn't have been entirely out of character for her to leave abruptly, they did not believe she would have abandoned her children entirely. Her disappearance left more questions than answers and set off a troubling series of events that would span decades. Following Donia's disappearance, her ex-husband, Richard Clinton Howard, moved into her home and began taking care of their children. However, Richard did not report Donia missing. It was her father who filed the missing persons report nearly 2 weeks later, on December 27, 1985. Richard claimed he believed Donia had gone on a trip to visit her sister in Europe, but this explanation quickly fell apart when it was revealed that Donia's sister had not been in Europe at the time. Then, on the same day Donia was officially reported missing, Richard's brother, Roger Howard, went to the police with a chilling account. Roger alleged that Richard had confessed to killing Donia, describing in gruesome detail how he attacked her while she was sleeping on the couch. According to Roger, Richard had beaten and choked her to death, then disposed of her body by flushing the flesh down the toilet and placing the bones in a trash container near Bronig Lake. In 1986, Richard was charged with Donia's murder based on Roger's statement, but the charge was dropped less than a week later due to insufficient evidence. A search of Richard's trailer yielded no indications of a dead body, and without physical proof, the case against him could not proceed. Despite this, authorities believed Roger's account of the confession was credible. Richard's actions after Donia's disappearance only added to the suspicion surrounding him. Later in 1986, Richard married another woman, Cora Jean Howard, and the couple moved to Michigan. Their marriage would eventually end in tragedy as well. In July 1999, Cora disappeared under eerily similar circumstances to Donia. Richard claimed that Cora had taken a bus to Texas to visit her aunt, but investigators quickly determined that Cora did not have an aunt in Texas. Authorities were poised to arrest Richard for Cora's murder in January 2003 when he voluntarily turned himself in and confessed to killing her. In August of that year, Richard led investigators to Cora's remains, which he had buried in the basement of his barn. He was subsequently convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. However, despite the strong suspicion surrounding his involvement in Donia's disappearance, Richard was never convicted or even charged again in connection with her case. Donia's remains were never found, and her case remains unsolved. Donia Jo Howard, a 1973 graduate of East Central High School, left behind 2 children and a family who still seek answers. The chilling similarities between her disappearance and the later murder of Cora Jean Howard have left many convinced of foul play in Donia's case. Although decades have passed, her loved ones continue to hope for justice and closure in the mystery of what happened to her. Cole Jackson was last seen on July 13, 2006, near FM 1645 and County Route 4230, just south of Timpson, Texas. On that day, Jackson was driving his silver 2003 Dodge half-ton pickup truck when he drove out of a private pasture and crashed into a fence. The elderly man who owned the land approached Jackson after hearing the crash. Jackson reportedly apologized for the damage, offering to pay $120 for the repairs. He then claimed that he had to leave quickly because bad people were chasing him, adding an air of confusion and fear to the situation. After this brief conversation, Jackson abruptly disappeared, and he has never been heard from again. 2 days later, on July 15th, Jackson's truck was discovered abandoned in Shelby County, Texas, approximately 2 miles from where he had been seen. The truck's driver's side door was open, and it was still in 4-wheel drive, which indicated that Jackson may have been in a rush to leave the vehicle. Both of Jackson's inhalers were found inside the truck, which was unusual since he had a history of asthma and would likely need them with him if he were leaving in a hurry. However, there were no signs of a struggle, and the area around the truck appeared undisturbed. Further complicating the case were the discoveries made by Jackson's family members. In the woods near the abandoned truck, they found Jackson's white sneakers, with his wedding ring placed inside one of the shoes. This unusual find raised further concerns, especially considering Jackson had been acting strangely and paranoid in the days leading up to his disappearance. His family members feared that his behavior might have been linked to his previous struggles with drug abuse, as they thought it possible that drugs played a role in his disappearance. However, there was no direct evidence to suggest that drugs were involved. At the time of his disappearance, Jackson's wife was 3 months pregnant with their first child, which added to the emotional toll on his family. Despite numerous investigations, searches, and efforts to piece together the circumstances of his disappearance, Jackson's whereabouts remain unknown. His case continues to be unsolved, leaving his loved ones with lingering questions and fears about what happened to him. Angela Jarillo was last seen in Dallas, Texas, on January 23, 2010, at approximately 11:30 p.m. She left her home to attend a party at a boy's house, and shortly after, she sent a text message to her mother asking for permission to spend the night with a friend. Her mother gave her consent. However, Angela has not been heard from since. The following morning, at around 9:30 a.m., Angela's mother attempted to contact her by phone, but Angela did not answer. Concerned, her mother reached out to the friend Angela had planned to stay with, only to find out that Angela had never shown up. The boy who had hosted the party stated that Angela had left the gathering around 2 a.m., but after that, no one knew of her whereabouts. At the time of her disappearance, Angela was a student at Molina High School, where she was an active participant in sports, including soccer and volleyball. She had 3 younger siblings and was reportedly doing well in school, so her disappearance raised immediate concerns. Her family did not believe that Angela had any history of running away, making her sudden disappearance even more puzzling. Initially, Angela's case was classified as a runaway, but investigators soon began to suspect that foul play might have been involved. A significant break in the case came when authorities found Angela's cellular phone in a local park. They also uncovered unspecified evidence suggesting that she had been injured. These discoveries indicated that something more sinister may have occurred. Despite these leads, Angela has not accessed her bank account since her disappearance, and there has been no clear indication of where she might have gone or who might be responsible for her disappearance. While her mother does not believe Angela is being held against her will, she suspects that Angela may have run away to prove a point. Over time, there have been some reported sightings of Angela in the Dallas area, some of which came from people who knew her. However, none of these sightings have been confirmed, and there is no evidence to support that Angela is alive or safe. Angela's case remains unsolved, and authorities continue to investigate all potential leads. Diane Hopson was last seen on the morning of November 18, 2007, at her home located on Van Zandt County Road, 2815 near Maybank, Texas. That day, she had plans to spend her time mowing the pasture around her property, and an acquaintance of 15 years, Johnson Walter Burris, was scheduled to come over to work on her lawnmower. Diane's adult daughter visited her earlier that morning and left without sensing anything unusual. However, the events that unfolded later that day would lead to a troubling and tragic mystery. Around 4:30 p.m., Burris's sister saw him with Diane at her home. Just an hour later, at 5:30 p.m., she noticed her brother back at his own home, this time alone. This marked the last known time anyone saw Diane Hopson alive. By the following evening, Diane's daughter became increasingly worried when her mother remained unreachable. She went to the house and made a shocking discovery: signs of a violent struggle. A massive amount of blood was found on the back porch of the home, enough for authorities to later conclude that it was likely someone had died at the scene. In addition, drag marks were found, indicating a body had been moved from the house, likely onto a vehicle, and taken away. Strangely, Diane's personal belongings remained untouched. Both of her cars, along with her keys, purse, and cell phone, were still at her home. Concerned for her safety, Diane's daughter contacted the police just before midnight on November 19th, initiating a search that would reveal chilling evidence but leave crucial questions unanswered. Neighbors reported hearing a loud argument at Diane's home on the evening of November 18th, further solidifying suspicions of foul play. Witnesses also noted that a light-colored pickup truck, matching the description of Burris's vehicle, was the last known vehicle parked at Diane's property that night. Burris himself admitted to authorities that he had visited Diane's home that day to repair her tractor, but his story quickly unraveled under scrutiny. When police searched his truck, they found traces of blood in both the cab and on the tailgate. The mounting evidence left little doubt that something terrible had happened to Diane. Nearly 2 weeks after her disappearance, Johnson Walter Burris was arrested and charged with Diane's murder, even though her body had not been found. His long-standing relationship with Diane, along with the damning physical evidence and eyewitness accounts, played a critical role in building the case against him. Ultimately, Burris was convicted of Diane Hopson's murder, even though her remains have never been recovered. Myrtle Green Hudson was last seen on September 11, 1986, at her home in the 800 block of Colorado Avenue in Port Arthur, Texas, where a horrifying chain of events unfolded that day. When her husband and teenage son returned home, they discovered a gruesome crime scene. Myrtle's 18-year-old daughter, Jimenez Hudson, was found in the attic above the garage. She had been brutally murdered, bound with shoelaces and strangled with the power cord of a child's easy-bake oven. The attack occurred between 1 o'clock and 4 p.m. Despite the violence of the scene, Willette was fully clothed. In the house, Willette's 3-month-old sister was miraculously unharmed, sleeping peacefully, but Myrtle herself was missing, leaving behind a chilling mystery. The evidence in the house suggested a forced entry, as the intruder or intruders had broken a window in the front door to gain access. Drops of blood were found inside, and Myrtle's purse, Willette's purse, and Myrtle's keys were all left on the kitchen table, untouched. The apparent motive for the crime was initially believed to be robbery, but the brutality of Willette's murder hinted at something far more sinister. Despite thorough investigations, the case remained unsolved for over 2 decades, leaving Myrtle's family and community in anguish. In January 2008, a breakthrough finally came when authorities identified the man responsible for the horrific events, Tommy Lee Stewart. Stewart had a violent criminal history, including a previous murder conviction in 1971 for which he had been imprisoned until 1986, the same year Willette was killed and Myrtle disappeared. After his parole, Stewart lived with a woman and frequently visited her brother, who happened to be a neighbor of the Hudson family. In November 1986, Stewart committed another heinous crime, abducting, raping, and attempting to murder a juvenile girl who survived and was able to identify him. This attack led to his incarceration, where he has remained ever since. Years later, DNA evidence placed Stewart at the scene of Willette's murder. Confronted with the forensic proof, Stewart confessed to killing both Willette and Myrtle. He admitted that he had left Myrtle's body on Pleasure Island, the same remote location where he had left the juvenile victim in his 1986 attack, who managed to survive. Although Stewart pleaded guilty to Willette's murder, he was never prosecuted for Myrtle's case, likely due to the lack of physical remains or additional evidence linking him to her death. Nonetheless, the circumstances and his confession strongly suggest foul play. Stewart's admission brought some answers to the Hudson family after decades of uncertainty, but it also cemented the tragic reality that Myrtle's body has never been recovered. Today, Stewart remains behind bars, serving his sentence for his crimes. He will not be eligible for parole until 2028, when he will be 78 years old. Pamela Hubner, a housewife from Houston, Texas, was last seen on June 9, 1971, and has never been heard from again. Her disappearance became linked to a string of horrific crimes when, in 1972, Harry Andrew Lanham confessed to raping and killing her. Lanham, a tow truck driver with a history of violent offenses including rape and assault, was implicated alongside another convicted rapist, Anthony Michael Tony Napa Jr., in a series of murders that shocked Texas. Authorities believe the 2 men were responsible for the deaths of 6 young women between June and November 1971. Lanham and Napa were ultimately convicted for one of the murders, with Lanham receiving a 25-year prison sentence and Napa a 50-year sentence. Their case drew national attention as details emerged of their brutal crimes and their possible involvement in additional homicides. Investigators suspected Lanham of being responsible for as many as 9 murders, including Hubner's presumed killing, but he was never formally charged in her case. Twice, Lanham led authorities to locations where he claimed to have left Hubner's body, but thorough searches turned up nothing, and Lanham later admitted to lying about the locations. His confessions added to the anguish and frustration of the case, as no solid evidence of Hubner's fate could be uncovered. Tragedy struck again on December 30th, 1973, when Lanham, still awaiting trial for other murders, attempted to escape from the Harris County Jail and was fatally shot by police during the breakout attempt. With Lanham's death, the pending charges against Napa were dropped, as Lanham had been the primary witness against his partner in crime. Napa went on to serve 15 years of his 50-year sentence before being released in 1989. Despite the convictions and confessions, Pamela Hubner's body has never been found, leaving her case as a haunting reminder of the lives lost during a spree of violence that devastated families and communities. Her disappearance remains unsolved.